Welcome to Agape and Eros, the show about love, relationships, and religion. I'm Bridget Richardson, and today we're going to cover a super fun topic, how we first met. So we're going to feature three of our Max Studios contributors, Nicole, Max, and Alex, and they're going to tell us the story of how they first met their spouse. But before we do that, let's take a look at how the culture thinks about marriage. According to a survey by the Pew Research Center in 2013, about 1 in 10 Americans cited love as a very important reason to get married, ahead of making a lifelong commitment and companionship. All pretty close numbers, but it begs the question, what does love really mean in our cultures, especially how we show it to others? Is love that, funny feeling that you get when you first meet someone, or the feeling that you just can't explain? Or is it the very practical decision to live life with this person forever? Or is it both? These are the questions that we should be asking of ourselves and our culture. And sometimes it's not an easy answer. In matters of the heart, you really have to understand yourself and who you are before you can even decide if you found a love worth pursuing. So to learn and understand more, let's go to Larry Freeney with Rejoice Counseling on this one.
When it comes to finding that person for you, whether it's in dating, in a relationship, or eventually marriage, the important thing to do is before you start looking externally is to look internally and find out who you are as a person, what is important to you, and kind of the life that you want to have. A lot of times I find people who lose themselves or maybe have not taken the time to find themselves, get into a relationship, and now that relationship becomes their identity. And so now they are a boyfriend or they are a girlfriend. And if the relationship is unhappy, then they're unhappy, right? And so they kind of feel this feeling of lostness, of disconnection when they're not in that relationship.
So identity plays a huge role, right? So Larry, what do we do to not let our identity get caught up in, love at first sight or even lust at first sight in most cases?
And so the best thing that you can do if you're currently not seeing anyone, or if you're currently dating someone, or even thinking about it, is to really go inward and have that conversation with God and find out who God says you are. Remember when Jesus asked the disciples, who do they say that the Son of Man is, right? Some said Elijah, some said Moses or another prophet. But then he asked an important question, who do you say I am? So that's a great question to ask God. Who do you say I am? Not the world, not my family, not even myself, but who do you say I am? And through that journey that question will take you on, you get to learn what you truly value, what's truly important to you. And once you have that lined out, then you can find someone who complements that, who's along the same line so that you're aligned, so that you're equally yoked. If you don't do this important work, what you'll find out is that later down the line, things that you were kind of okay with because, he was cute or she was very pretty, so the things that annoyed you or the things that got on your nerves, you can just kind of push them to the side. But over time, these disalignment or this disconnect builds. And there's a saying that I love, it is red flags now become major problems later.
Someone who compliments you and you're equally yoked. I mean, seriously, that is like the ultimate way to think about journeying with a spouse. And so Larry's right, you don't want to avoid those red flags now and have big problems later. So, it's just a lot to think about, right? But now let's hear some stories. So first we're going to start with Nicole. She's going to tell us the story of how she met her husband, Chris.
My husband, Chris, and I met at an Irish bar here in Houston. We both went to Notre Dame, him for undergrad and me for grad school. And we'd been attending football game watches with the local alumni group that season. On a typical game day, there were usually about 100 people at those, but that week the team was playing in San Antonio. So most of the usual attendees went to San Antonio to watch the game live. And so that Saturday there were 4 of us. So naturally we decided to sit at the same table together. The Irish were playing really poorly that day, and so Chris and I made our attempts at awkward small talk. At one point during the game, I heard Chris share a few names of friends that he knew from his time in undergrad at Notre Dame. I recognized their names, and they were sort of unusual names. They were my classmates when I was in grad school that had just been ordained to the priesthood earlier that spring. And so I asked him, wait, how do you know those guys? Chris told me that he had been in undergraduate seminary with them for 2 years before he discerned out. And so our awkward small talk very quickly turned to good conversation as we learned that we had both studied theology in grad school and worked as ministers for the church, both working for the archdiocese. And typically these aren't the kind of details that you lead with when getting to know someone new. But once we knew that we had those priest friends in common, we opened up a lot more.
That definitely plays into what Larry was talking about with Nicole finding someone who complimented her. So let's hear about how Nicole figured out how God was working through that whole experience and through both of their lives.
Divine providence was very much at work in our story. I had just graduated with my master's from Notre Dame and prayed that God would lead me to my spouse. I felt a series of nudges to go to Houston, so much so that I turned down an opportunity to interview in another city. Chris had just been laid off from his job in Minnesota, and a nationwide search led him to Houston. We had both moved there earlier that summer. We became good friends really quickly, and that friendship led to romance and to the very deep peace and consolation that we were one another's vocations. We were actually engaged about 7 months after that first meeting.
So finding where divine providence is working in your life and how God really does surprise us is truly incredible. Like there are all these nudges sometimes throughout our lives, and being able to recognize that is such a gift. So now let's hear from Max, because this is a really cool story. It's fun, and you can see how, God just surprises us when we totally and completely least expect it, even at Chick-fil-A.
So the first time we ever met actually was at Chick-fil-A. I was working there in college in South Bend, Indiana, and her friend, which I was friends with in college, her friend and her both came to Chick-fil-A, and they ordered a frosted lemonade from me. So the first thing that I ever did when I first met her was I made a frosted lemonade. So my first impression really was, is she going to like this frosted lemonade, because it was a new item at Chick-fil-A. But the real first impression, I would say, came a couple months later. They went to a Zac Brown Band concert, and they invited my friends and I to come and hang out before and after the show. We did not go to the show, so it wasn't like we went to this concert together or anything, but we hung out before and after. And from there, I really got to know her. I thought she was really cool and pretty, and it led into us starting our relationship. We started a relationship long distance, so that's an interesting detail about our relationship. But from there, obviously it worked out because we got married. And that's my first impression.
So we went from Chick-fil-A to a long distance relationship to marriage. Like, that's awesome. And, the thing about long distance is that you have the opportunity to talk a lot. And you have these long, meaningful conversations where you can really dive deep and get to know someone and see if you are equally yoked with this person and if they do compliment you well. Finally, we hear from Alex. I just love this story because Alex met his spouse somewhere where love was already in the air, and yet neither one of them really wanted to be there. So let's hear from Alex.
First, we met in Houston. So I was invited at a wedding. Actually, I didn't want to go. And it turned out to be that she didn't want to go too. So basically got there. I was seated by myself in a table. Everybody else was dancing. And she was also sitting in another table, not dancing, basically looked like she was bored. I was like, all right, let me walk up to her. So walk up there, asked to sit down, and we sat. And I sat down and we started talking.
So if you've ever been single and at a wedding by yourself, you can definitely identify with Alex's story. And, let's be real. It's awkward. It's crazy awkward. And kudos to Alex for putting himself out there. So let's hear the rest of their story.
The first impression was, is always very important. First impression. She seems to be a very religious person, which was, kind of connected with me. And not that I am that religious, but, very interesting, as a theology student, to always, hear about other people talking about God, and that was very interesting to me. Her views about God, how does she sees religion. And so we talked, and it was very interesting, so that, first impression was really, the very fact that, we talked for a long time. Actually, we didn't really see time go by. which is very, very important and very attractive to me.
When people say they didn't even see time go by, or they didn't even see, where did the time go? I really feel like that's an expression of God working in their lives, because God is the ultimate operator outside of time, right? He surpasses all of that. So when you think of past, present, future, and how we perceive time, God is in that in a way that we can barely comprehend, because he is outside of all of it, and all of it is present to him. So I just love it when people relate that time aspect to their love relationships. And I'm sorry to go all St. Augustine, but it's just totally fascinating to me. But let's continue with Alex's story.
As I was getting ready to leave, and she was like, hey, I don't know what I'm doing here. Can you, if you don't mind just dropping me off? So as I picked her up to go drop her off, now we're coming from a wedding where there's food and everything. And she's like, hey, why don't we stop at IHOP? And I'm like, we just came from where, there were all these food and all of that. So we went and stopped at IHOP and she ate breakfast. And I realized, hey, she's a night person. Of course, as a nurse, she's always comfortable working at night instead of during the day. So she was more awake at night, which I am not. So I was way more tired than which she was. But I only felt it after we finished talking. Because when you are in that mood, when you meet that person that is attractive, that you have this, special connection to, you don't feel anything, is when I dropped her off after we probably talked for another 2 hours at IHOP. And when I dropped her off some 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, that I am leaving and I am almost sleeping while driving because I realized that I was really tired. So it was a very special moment, very interesting, and everything went on from there. She went back to Dallas, we stayed in touch, and here we are today, 6 years later with, beautiful children, happy to be together. And we just, it's just such a thankful moment for me particularly to see that we were able to connect and make this journey together.
I just love how Alex tells this story. He just gets so excited, and he talks about how he gets wrapped up in the conversation with this interesting and beautiful woman that, he didn't even realize how tired he was. It's just so special. And then only to find out that this is someone who he has truly built a life with. It's just such a beautiful story. So where do we go from here? We have 3 really interesting stories, really cool stories about how people met their spouses. So if you're married, this is the perfect opportunity to just talk to your spouse about that first meeting story, those first impressions, where you were, what happened, all the circumstances. Do it tonight. Have fun with it. Laugh about what each of you said and what each of you thought about each other. And, if you journal, take this time to pull out the journal and write about how you saw God working through that experience now that you're kind of looking back at it. And if you're single, I think this is the perfect opportunity as well to do some of what Larry was talking about. Take this time to look inside and say, what is my identity? What do I want? Who am I in this? And then even better yet, ask God, who do you say that I am? The website For Your Marriage has a great article titled Dating: 4 Basics to Keep in Mind. It's short. Check it out, and don't be afraid to ask God the tough questions about who you are so you can be ready and aware when someone comes into your life who you believe could be a potential spouse. You'll find some more helpful links in the description as well. So I'll leave you with this verse from Proverbs, which is the book of the Bible that's all about teaching and wisdom for both young and old. Do not let love and fidelity forsake you. Bind them around your neck. Write them on the tablet of your heart. Then you will win favor and esteem before God and human beings. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. On your own intelligence, do not rely. In all your ways, be mindful of Him, and He will make straight your paths. That's it for now, digital disciples. And just remember, keep loving, be joyful, and stay hopeful.